The history of Zozobra is very interesting. It sort of begins in 1924 when a group of artists here in this city began the art community that blossomed into what it is today. They were a different kind of artists that had come from the East, and they all sort of arrived in 1921. And in 1924 they decided that the historical fiesta needed a little more punch, a little more excitement to kick it off. They were a little tired of the boring fiesta that they thought it had become. So they got together and came up with the idea of burning an effigy. And chief among them was the artist Will Shuster, who had just arrived from Philadelphia 3 years prior. He had been given a death sentence leaving Philadelphia, having been diagnosed a lunger in Philadelphia by his doctors. He had been gassed in the trenches of France during World War I, about 2 years prior to that, and wasn't given much of a chance being called the lunger. So his doctor said, go out west. If you go out west, you have a chance to die of old age or bad whiskey or both. So he took that chance, and with his wife, he came out to Santa Fe, New Mexico on his way to Taos, I think was his ultimate destination, I've heard. And he ended up in the City Different and just fell in love with the place. And there were the other artists, the other 4 artists that he got to be friends with, who in the next 5 years, from 1921 to 1926, became Los Cincos, the five painters, or as they were affectionately called in the city, the 5 little nuts and the 5 adobe huts, because they all built little adobe houses, and not very well on the Camino del Monte Sol. And he came here with these artists, and every day he'd go out for a little more of a walk, head over to Sun Mountain or up to where the present-day St. John's College is, and he'd figure, well, one day I'll die on my walk because of my bad lungs. But as he proceeded through this whole thing, he found out that he was not dying anymore. In fact, his health was rejuvenated in this high desert air. So he really enjoyed his time here, and before you knew it, his lung problems were gone. They did haunt him later on in life, but Will Shuster was able to keep going with this amazing art community that he had become a part of. So in 1924, to kick off this fiesta I was telling you about, they decided to burn an effigy. Someone had been down in Mexico and had seen the burning of Judas and thought that that was a great idea. Someone else had been to the Caribbean and seen where they had burned some other little small boats and cast them out into the sunset. And of course they had known about Wicker Man and other kinds of effigies around the world that have been burned for 4,000 years or so. So they thought they'd build an effigy. And one of the things that they decided to do was to get together, build an effigy and burn it. And Will Shuster got with one of his friends whose name was Gustav Baumann, a famous puppeteer and etcher. And Gustav Baumann built the first head and Shuster built the first body, only they didn't quite get together on the scale. So it ended up being this gigantic body and a little pinhead, they called it. In 1924, they burned what was affectionately to be called Old Man Groucher, or Old Man Depression for the times. And 1925, again in a backyard burning in some party, they burned another Old Man Groucher, Old Man Depression. In 1926, the city fathers, those having to do with the Fiesta Council and the perpetuation of the Las Fiestas de Santa Fe, thought, you know, that really cool thing you do in your backyard, would you mind doing that for us? And they asked him formally if he would burn that effigy. So together with E. Dana Johnson, the editor of the Santa Fe New Mexican, they decided they needed a better name for Old Man Groucher. And E. Dana Johnson had seen in the back of an old Spanish-Mexican dictionary a word at the end with a Z on the end of it that kind of summed it up. And so turning to the last page, he showed it to Will Shuster, and there was that word, Zozobra, anguish, anxiety, gloom, the gloomy one. Old Man Groucher became Old Man Gloom, and he had his name, and the first record of that in the Santa Fe New Mexican shows up the night after it was burned, somewhere in a lot off Nussbaum Street, near where the present-day Santa Fe Reporter and the new library was an open field, and that first Zozobra was burned there. And interestingly enough, that first ceremony included Kiwanians from the Club of Santa Fe that had just started their club in 1921. Same year Shuster got there, another interesting coincidence. And the first Zozobra is described as the gloomy figure in this lot surrounded by bonfires that were lit. and there was somebody measuring doleful sounds on a gong, and the absent mayor was filled in for by the sheriff, Isidoro Armijo, who came up to Zozobra very formally and read the charges against him for being gloomy and for ruining everyone's lives. And without any further ado, he pulled his sidearm from his belt and he fired a number of shots into this effigy. I think he emptied his revolver, is what I've heard, and was then surrounded by these hooded, cloaked figures who were the death sentencers. And someone put a match to him, and he started into flames and burst with the fireworks that they had for him at that point. And these cloaks were thrown off, and underneath the cloaks, festively dressed and gaily dressed for the air, they said, were the Kiwanians that had come to help put him away. And so that first Zozobra was how it went down in 1926. 27, 28, 29, 30, we don't really have record of that. And sometime in the 30s, they came out here to Fort Marcy Park, where these stairs were built as part of the WPA work projects. Madrid Ballpark was built at the same time at Fort Marcy was built. These weren't on the blueprints, but here they sit and here they stay, and we think 37 or 39, the first Zozobras were burned at Fort Marcy Park. For many people, Will Shuster's Zozobra represents so many different things, and every year I get to find out what those things are. For instance, this year, a wedding dress has been shipped from Katrina, a hurricane person in Louisiana who has wanted to put this wedding dress in for a couple of years, but the hurricane stopped her, and she shipped it to me, FedEx, and we're going to put this $3,000 hand-stitched wedding dress into Zozobra. She wants her gloom burned away. The school children that come out to the park on the day we put the effigy on this pole will write down their glooms on little pieces of paper and scribble down their thoughts, and we'll put those in. For others in Santa Fe, they'll write their glooms down privately, and they'll come to the crowd and to the crowd that masses here on the night of the event, and they'll bring their glooms, and personally they'll have some way that they do it, where they cast off their glooms. For a lot of people, it's a new year. For me, it's almost my New Year's, because I go about 362 days a year on this thing, and I give my birthday, Christmas, and maybe the one day off I don't think about it. And it is a new year. It starts the winter, it starts the end of the season. And so for many people, it means different things. For the Kiwanis Club of Santa Fe, it represents an opportunity to raise money for the community for children. Kiwanis International, of which we are a part of, I'm a Kiwanian, they have a mission, making a difference one child at a time. And Zozobra, since 1964, when Will Shuster gave it to the Kiwanis Club of Santa Fe, and then in '72 when the Santa Fe Downtown Kiwanis Foundation was established, from which to spend the money that Zozobra raises for the community, has raised millions of dollars for this community, for all the different not-for-profits that benefit and help children in our community. The monies raised from the burning of Will Shuster's Zozobra directly benefit the community of Santa Fe in that they go toward children. Kiwanis International has a policy, of which the Kiwanis Club of Santa Fe is a member, making a difference one child at a time. The burning of Will Shuster's Zozobra enables a multitude of not-for-profits here in Santa Fe to benefit. For instance, last year's Zozobra, we netted about $36,000 specifically and allocated to the not-for-profits here in Santa Fe. Worthy organizations like Girls Inc., FACT, which stands for Fine Arts for Children and Teens, the Boys Club, the Girls Club, the Boy Scouts of America, the Girl Scouts of America, and the Salvation Army's program for Souls for Little Souls, Mervin's Kids Spree. There's the Pinewood Derby that's hosted every year. All these are benefited from the burning of Zozobra and the proceeds we raised the night of the event. We also gave last year $26,000 from those proceeds to an ongoing college scholarship program for area high school graduating teens, of which last year 4 were picked and 2 alternates were picked, and these scholarships continue for 4 years. So in any given year, Kiwanis could be sponsoring 16 to 18 kids.